Hello everybody, welcome to the video. So today I'm going to share with you one of my passions. As soon as I get this focused, we're actually filming this video with the Canon NFD 17mm f4 lens on the Canon R5 Mark II. And yeah, it looks good. Sorry, I keep looking at the screen. There's a certain distinct look that vintage lenses have, especially the older lenses with the imperfections. Things just kind of look a little bit weird and interesting, but I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video. First, I'm going to talk about the menu settings you need to set on your camera in order to shoot photos with your vintage lens. So let's jump into that, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about my two current favorite vintage lenses. This one's a little bit more expensive. This one's pretty cheap, but they both produce really interesting photos. So yeah, if you're into that, stick around at the end of the video and we'll talk about that. First, let's jump into the menu. Here's the thing, when you first buy your camera, the default settings are going to not allow the camera to shoot with vintage lenses because it won't be able to release the shutter without a lens on the front. So as you know, technology didn't really exist back in the day. These old cameras were all gears and sprockets and springs and stuff. So there's no electrical contacts on the back of the lens. So when you mount it onto your camera's gonna be like, there's no lens mounted to the front, so I'm not gonna release the shutter. And that's like a safety thing that's on by default. So what you wanna do is go into your menu. And again, if you shoot with Canon, this is gonna be like a Canon menu preview or tutorial, but if you shoot with any other kind of camera, Fuji, Sony, Nikon, Lumix, Leica, whatever the case may be, you're gonna have a similar setting in your menu in your camera system, so you can still activate this setting. It's just gonna be called something different, and it might be in a different place in the menu. So the setting you're looking for is release shutter without lens, and I've shot with different Canon cameras, and each menu is slightly different, and this setting is sometimes in different places in different cameras. So it's usually in one of those tabs that's assigned for customizing the camera. So just go into one of those tabs, look for release shutter without lens, and turn that on. So enable that. That'll allow your camera to shoot with no lens on the front, which is how it perceives vintage lenses. All right, so now we're filming with a modern piece of glass. We have the 15-35 RF on here, and you know, it's clinically sharp. So in order to take away that sharpness and add a touch of that vintage vibe, I've put a Tiffin Pro Mist 1/8 filter on the camera, which kind of takes away some of that sharpness and that modernness. It doesn't make it look vintage by any means, but it just kind of takes it a little bit back from the modern, super sharp kind of look that all the modern lenses have. So it's a little trick. If you don't want to get into vintage, you can maybe get one of these Tiffin Pro Mist filters and experiment with that. And another trick you can use with vintage lenses is assign one of these back buttons to be your magnifying glass and set it to, like, I don't know, 5 times and 10 times or 20 times, whatever the case may be. If you can set to multi-zoom. So you take the camera, you put it to your face, you hit the magnifying glass, you zoom in, you get your critical focus, and then you have to take a shot and then zoom out. I don't know why Canon hasn't put this in a firmware update. And Canon, if you're listening, it'd be nice if we just half press the shutter button and the camera would zoom back out to regular view again, but it doesn't do that. So you got to focus on your subject, take a shot, waste a shot, and then the camera will zoom back out, and then you can recompose and shoot. The other thing you can do is you can move your focus point around, or where the camera magnifies in, and put it on one of the rule of thirds or whatever the case may be. But if you want to set up your composition, move your focus point to where you want to focus, hit the magnifying glass, zoom in, get your critical focus, take the shot, and then you'll get the full screen, and then you can take some more shots. And that's just a little trick to shooting with vintage lenses. You definitely want to have that magnifying glass handy. All right, so now that you know which settings to enable to shoot with vintage lenses, let's talk about some vintage lenses. And these are two of my favorites right now. This is the Takumar f2.3 35mm. And look at that, that is a beautiful looking lens. Hopefully it's in focus here. And this one I bought on a whim. It's a very cheap lens, but I was so surprised with the quality and the look. If you're into that like retro 80s kind of like a little bit of chromatic aberrations in the corners and the edges, and that look that you get from like 80s and 90s movies that were filmed using cinema lenses, this has a really, really cool look. This is the Osawa 28mm f2.8. And if you're into vintage lenses, definitely check out my blog. I've got a ton of vintage lenses there. All my whole vintage lens collection is there with sample photos and little write-ups and little reviews about the lenses. I'm eventually gonna make videos about all these lenses for YouTube, but if you want to check them out, there you go. So let's throw this Takumar on the camera and take a look at what it looks like. All right, so hopefully I'm in focus. The one tough part with these vintage lenses is actually getting things in focus. And here are some example photos taken with this lens, and I just love the character and the richness. I mean, we live in a world right now where we're spoiled with lenses. It doesn't matter what brand you buy, everything is super sharp, super clean, super perfect. And I don't know, I love those lenses for when I do client work. You know, if I'm shooting a wedding or portraits or anything like that, it's just like, I want the clinically sharp lenses, I want the new gear, but that's for work. When it comes to like photography for pleasure or video for pleasure, I love these older lenses because they just have this unique character that just, I don't know, it's just, for me, it's just super cool and nostalgic to see these imperfections. And I really wish that camera brands would start making modern vintage lenses. So just use the old techniques and the old lens formulas and the old ways of making glass and apply that to modern lenses with autofocus. I think it would be so cool to have some kind of like a lineup of character lenses that are just imperfectly beautiful. All right, so let's throw the Osawa on there and take a look at some shots with the Osawa. All right, now we have the 28mm on here, and I'm going to run through some photo examples as I talk about this lens. Now, this is a very interesting lens. It can be found at a very fair price on eBay, and I don't know how to describe it, but this lens has that 3D pop-ish kind of feel where there's a certain like breath to the image, which is something I really like, and I feel like that's something that's really missing with modern lenses because everything just feels like it's compressed and flattened and everything is so sharp and tack everywhere. It's almost like a 2D image, whereas some of these older vintage lenses have this kind of feeling like you're in the image. There's like you're breathing them in like they're real life. It's really cool. So that's one of the things I really admire about the Osawa lens. And again, if you're into vintage lens photography or you just want to get into it and you're wondering which lens should I buy, what's a good starter lens, this Osawa 28mm f2.8 is fantastic. It's a great price, good quality optics, really good character with the lens. And at 28mm, it's kind of cool because back in the day, like we're going back like 70s, 80s, that kind of thing, 28mm was considered a really wide angle lens because the technology didn't really exist to create ultra wides yet, or the technology wasn't that good. They couldn't figure out how to get sharp lenses ultra wide. So 28mm was kind of like the standard wide angle lens. So by shooting with it, you kind of like go back into that bygone era and shoot like I guess your grandparents would have if they were into photography with a wide angle lens. So it's a cool piece of history and that kind of thing. So yeah, I just want to touch on these lenses real quick. And again, like I said, I've got a lot of lenses on the blog. So if you want to go check out some sample shots with different lenses, including the sample shots you saw today, check out the blog. All right, and thank you for watching. And if you're into vintage lens content, definitely subscribe to the channel. I know I don't produce exclusively vintage lens videos on this channel, but I do produce vintage lens content from time to time, and I definitely want to do more because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I just love these old pieces of glass. I think it's so cool. And you know, like my regular stuff is like camera reviews and tutorials and stuff like that, but you know, I really love sharing this stuff. And I know these videos don't typically do well on my channel, but I really don't care. I'm going to keep producing them because it's something I'm passionate about and something I want to share with those of you who are also into vintage lenses. So definitely subscribe, help me keep making more vintage lens content. I got a ton of lenses to review. But yeah, thank you for watching. You got any questions? Leave them in the comments below. If you learned something, give me a thumbs up. And yeah, that's it. I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for being part of the channel.